All right, we're good. We are live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of our Shaw Local Bears Insider podcast. I'm Hub Arkush, along with our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors, and our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider, Sean Hammond. If you've been waiting, that's on me. I apologize. Actually, it's on my computer. Every once in a while, it gets a mind of its own. But technology is wonderful, and here we are. And we thank you all for joining us once again. We'll keep an eye out for any thoughts you might want to add to it or questions. Just go into the chat function and let us know. It'll scroll right across our screen. So, guys, it's the first chance that we get to kind of sit down and brainstorm together, or not brainstorm. I'm sure nobody will accuse me of ever braining anything, but to talk about what happened last weekend. Obviously, NFL college draft in the books. The Chicago Bears being pretty much universally acclaimed for what they got done. And, so far, Sean, obviously the reaction couldn't be more positive, not only overall, but of course, starting at number one to being able to get Justin Fields for the price they paid.
Yeah, I mean, the draft, Ryan Pace basically said it. It was the perfect scenario. It played out exactly as he had hoped. They said plan A was to trade up and get a quarterback. And, that's what they did. The way things were going through that 7, 8, 9, 10 range, it just fell into place for them. And it sounds like they had, started the conversation with the Giants earlier in the day about potentially trading up, and the Giants were in agreement with that, and it all kind of worked out perfectly. And now you got a guy, Justin Fields, coming in here. He's a really high potential quarterback, and we'll just have to see how they approach this situation, this summer and as we go into training camp.
Kyle, it's interesting. Better than most, since you edit most of our stuff, as I've said for 2-3 months. Just didn't see the Bears getting a quarterback in the first round, but we did start to write in the last couple of weeks, unless one of these guys slips down into the teens and now it becomes a more manageable trade. But I think everybody was assuming that might be either Mac Jones or Trey Lance. And the fact that it was Justin Fields coming off the board fourth, when every NFL person I talked to pretty much agrees that he's the second best quarterback prospect in the draft. And so you wonder, with all those teams, the Lions, the Panthers, the Broncos, with, maybe not as great a quarterback needs, but serious quarterback needs with a chance to get a franchise guy, why were they passing? It's something that we're not talking about much in Chicago, but I do think it's something that we're going to need to dig into a little bit over the next couple of months.
Yeah, you wrote about it quite a bit, trying to explain to people the reasoning or the potential to be disappointed if the Bears did trade up because of how high the buzz factor is on these quarterbacks. It's outside of Trevor Lawrence. There's certain things I like about all four of that next group of quarterback, but I don't think any of them are a sure thing. I think Justin Fields is probably the second safest out of that group. But it was interesting to see how it developed on draft night, to kind of talk about how the sausage is made. When you go into an NFL draft, if you're a beat writer like Sean is, you write a bunch of stories in advance, just short little pieces about guys that the Bears could draft, so you have something ready to go. And we also had Sean do if they trade up or trade down. And it was funny, I think it was when it got to the Carolina and Denver picks, and neither of those teams took the quarterback, I told Sean to go ahead and just open up that trade up file, because I at that point I was pretty confident that the Bears were coming up to get Justin Fields or Mac Jones. I think, like Chicago, most fans in Chicago, I was holding my breath that it was going to be Justin Fields and not Mac Jones. Probably having a lot different conversation right now if the Bears had traded up to 11 for Mac Jones, I feel like.
Sean, I really think the key was when the Eagles traded with the Cowboys, because once the Eagles went up to number 10, the Bears knew that if in fact Fields, could get by the Broncos at number 9, had gotten by the Broncos at number 9, and now you had the Cowboys sitting at 12, there was no real risk until 14. Now, I have one source telling me that the Bears did reach out to the Cowboys as well, trying to go as low as they could to limit the compensation. But the Giants trade is the one that worked out. And I think the key for the Bears, at least at that moment, was that they didn't have to give up the second and third round pick this year in order to make the deal. You hate giving up the number one next year. I know people want to debate it, but that's just because people love to debate. No matter which NFL trade chart you use, whether it's Jimmy Johnson's or Rich Hill's or Over the Caps, they all agree the Bears did overpay, but you're going to for a shot at a franchise quarterback. They didn't appear to overpay as badly as they might have, not as badly as they overpaid for Mitch Trubisky to move up one spot. And I think that's why, in addition to adding Fields, there is so much excitement around Chicago right now.
Yeah, I was, I think Kyle, you were thinking it on draft night when you told me to get that trade up story ready, and I think a lot of people in Chicago were thinking it too as we watch Carolina and Denver particularly pass on quarterbacks, and then I was wondering myself if maybe that Dallas spot at number 10 was something the Bears were interested in, because everybody said that well, not everybody, but a lot of people thought that Dallas was looking for a cornerback, and you see Carolina take J.C. Horn, you see Denver take Patrick Surtain, and then Dallas is sitting there like, well, those are the guys we wanted. So,
how pissed off was Jerry Jones when that happened?
He had to be. I mean, if that's really what they ended up getting Micah Parsons at 12, which is a great pick. That's a good thing. But if they were really looking for that cornerback, I mean, they had to be a little bit upset with how that developed.
The interesting thing about it, guys, and this does tend to happen to Jerry Jones, is that he backed himself into the best defensive prospect in the draft, not the second or third best defensive prospect in the draft. So I'm sure he was upset at the moment, but I got a hunch there was no, worrying about it afterwards. I think the key, though, guys, is that when Dallas was sitting at 10, the Bears at that point were focused on the Giants because they knew Dallas and the Giants weren't taking a quarterback, but they were worried about Philadelphia. I think where it really got a little intriguing is that when Philadelphia went up to 10 and didn't take the quarterback, that's where they knew they had the breathing room and a chance to work this, because sometimes, they had spoken to the Giants earlier in the day, but they'd spoken to half the teams in the league earlier in the day. That's the way this works. And just the fact that they did get him in the end. And then the other piece, I think, Kyle, because, we get to number 2 and Tevin Jenkins, is at that point you still had your second and third round pick. And yes, they gave up the third round pick for Jenkins, but that's what allowed them to trade up into getting not only what I'm led to believe was the first quarterback on their board, knowing that Trevor Lawrence wasn't going to be available, but the number 3 tackle on their board, who never should have been sitting there at 38.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly, I want to point out we got a bunch of people watching on Twitter and YouTube. Just to show you a little something here, we can actually pull up your YouTube comments. So if you're on Twitter, if you want to jump onto the YouTube page, you can ask us questions. We will answer them. We're glad to talk with you guys. And the other thing is, ComEd is behind my house right now, digging a giant hole, and they just showed up after it rained all morning. So if we start hearing construction equipment, I apologize for that. The issues of working from home during a pandemic, right, guys? But no, the Tevin Jenkins thing, just really wonderful, a wonderful break for the Bears to be able to hold on to, at that time, the second and third pick, and then be in the position to have your I think we all felt the greatest need for this team going into the draft was offensive tackle, but to be able to get that quarterback, a potential franchise quarterback, fall to you to be able to go up and get him, and then still get the tackle that you needed. I mean, just everything really came up aces for the Bears, it felt like.
Yeah, I think it's ComEd just showing up in live TV, if we want to call it that, Kyle. So it's going to be what it's going to be. Sean, the Jenkins thing that makes this that much more exciting is this idea now that is spreading pretty quickly that he may be the left tackle, because all the pre-draft stuff had him at right tackle. We talked with Mike Gundy, his college coach, the morning after the draft, and he insisted that he thinks he is equally adept. He did start 7 games at left tackle, 22 at right tackle at Oklahoma State. I had only watched the right tackle tape. I went back and found one of the left tackle games. wasn't outstanding, but wasn't awful. Nothing that suggested he couldn't do it. And then looking at him, through a different lens on tape, the one thing Gundy said that is true is that when you look from the waist down, from the hips down, he does have pretty good feet for a man his size. He has some athleticism. So I think you end up with a worst case situation. You have your right tackle for the next 10 years who could go to a few Pro Bowls. You may have your left tackle in the same regard. And then you go to that move in trading down. What Ryan Pace was able to do, and it seemed like an afterthought at the time, was to get the 5th round pick back that he gave up to go up and get Fields. And then Larry Borum's still sitting on the board. And you guys may recall, I wrote about him a month or two ago. I can't remember now if it was Twitter or a column or whatever it was. I know we talked about him on the radio. I had talked to a couple of these former offensive line coaches who now have their own offensive line schools. And he was a guy that they both pointed out when I asked about under the radar guys. Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa was another one. But I think Larry Borum's going to be a starting right tackle in the league somewhere for 6, 7, 8 years. So it's almost as if this was a script written in Hollywood, the way it finally worked out.
It was funny. I had to run out for a little bit on Saturday afternoon and run a couple errands. And so I had the score on Hub when the Larry Borum pick came on. And the second I heard the name, I was like, oh, Hub is fist pumping right now. This is his guy.
Yeah, Hub doesn't do a lot of fist pumping over stuff like that, but it just struck me. You know what it told me, Kyle? It told me that okay, at least my information is good or reasonable. And because I had heard about him earlier, I watched a lot more tape than you normally would of a guy who probably he fit. I thought maybe 4th round. He fit where they took him, 4th or 5th round. But he's just not the kind of guy, Sean, that you do a lot of studying about before the draft unless you have reason to. And so just the fact that was coincidence that was fortunate. Nobody's pretending it's any more than that. I think the point here, though, is that, and then we go to the last piece, and then we're going to start to back up and talk about all the other things surrounding this, is that it didn't take long Monday morning for Charles Leno to be released. Now, I guess I have a bit of a reputation among some of our peers in the media. I don't know about fans as a Charles Leno hater. That could not be further from the truth. He's a young man who I admire tremendously. You're talking about a 7th round pick who ends up starting for 7 straight years at left tackle in the NFL. Tremendous accomplishments. The problem has always been that he is a barely average, probably slightly below average left tackle. He has been part of the big problem with this offense the last couple of years, and they needed to get better. And we don't know if they have or not, but it appears that they have. It doesn't seem likely they got worse. And so that's just kind of completing the necessary cycle, coming full circle. And again, just one more reason to feel good about what Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are doing right now.
Yeah, Hub, nobody's going to argue that 93 consecutive regular season starts at left tackle in the NFL is a bad thing. I mean, you have to be able to, there's a lot of things that have to go right to do that. And, Charles Leno, the person is a good dude, and he's done a lot of good things for the community, and his charity work and all that stuff around Christmas time is, it was just a necessary thing that the Bears needed to do. Like you were saying, they can't continue to go to accept an average as the good thing. They need to try to upgrade that and get more out of their tackle position. And the thing I find interesting about Larry Borum is he's kind of a guy who's been overlooked his whole career. I mean, he didn't have a lot of Division I college offers. I think the summer before his senior year, he went to a camp at Missouri, and the Tigers coaching staff offered him that weekend, and that was his first big offer, and he stuck with them. And he started 19 games in the SEC, at 16 of them at right tackle. And I think that's a really good a pick in the 5th round, and we'll see what they can get out of him moving forward here.
Sorry, just really quickly to add in on the Charles Leno thing. Yeah, he's considered a well-liked guy in that locker room. This all comes down to the fact of where the Bears are in the salary cap, in their situation overall, and with the cap coming down. If they were in a better cap situation, I'm pretty confident that Charles Leno Jr. would still be on this roster. He might not be starting week 1, but I think they would have liked to have that veteran depth in case they felt more comfortable with leaving Tevin Jenkins on the right side. It was a necessary move considering where they are at with the cap right now.
Yeah, Kyle, it's interesting because that's a great segue to something we're going to get to in a couple of minutes, what everybody's talking about right now. I expect you're right, and I expect he would have been starting day one. Just don't know how long he would have held on to that position. Normally, even if you've got a great left tackle prospect, they start a lot of these kids at right tackle to give them the NFL exposure and experience before they move them over to the left side. So if it is going to be Tevin Jenkins on day one, it is a lot of extra pressure. I'm sure they would have preferred to avoid, but I do know they feel like he's a guy who can probably handle it. Now, the other thing that is a little bit interesting is I heard Ryan Pace talking about one of the reasons for the Elijah Wilkinson signing is that they thought maybe he could be a swing tackle. I'm not aware of any left tackle experience that he has. He certainly doesn't look like a left tackle body. I still think they're going to sign another street vet. It was a question that I asked Pace at the end of our press conference on Saturday. All right, now that the draft is over, what's next? And he confirmed point blank, yes, we are now going back to our board where we do have a number of veteran free agents out there. Unfortunately, the guy I like the most, Alejandro Villanueva, just in terms of the Bears situation, signs with the Ravens Monday morning. This is what a lot of teams were doing, is waiting for the draft. So we'll see what happens. But I think in a perfect world, they'd probably rather have a guy with some experience on day one at left tackle. But now we've got to watch their moves.
You talk about street free agents too. The Bears are designating Charles Leno Jr. as a post June 1st cut, which means instead of saving about $6.5 million, I think it goes up to $9 million if it's post June 1st. And the Bears are not going to be the only teams that do that. There's a lot of teams that are scrambling to get down to that cap threshold as we get close to training camp here. Even though there's still some free agents available, I expect more to emerge after that June 1st cut. So it's possible another tackle shows up on the board that could be of interest to the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be more players hitting the streets for sure. Now this is kind of the unwritten rules. It'll be a post-June 1. I can pretty much guarantee you, excuse me, that if in fact Charles Leno is in demand, and I'm not sure he's in quite the demand some are suggesting he is, he'll have a deal with another team before then. They just don't finalize any of it until then. So now you're talking to agents, you're trusting agents as to what they've been told or expect to happen. But there is a ton going on behind the scenes. Sean, let's just real quick touch on the other four new Chicago Bears, and then we'll start to get back to some main topics of interest. You now go into that sixth round. Khalil Herbert is another young man that we had a write-up on as one of our top 150 prospects. He definitely is value where they got him. I don't think he's ever going to be a great NFL running back, but there is a chance that he is an improvement over Ryan Nall and Artavis Pierce, and he does bring some kickoff return ability with him. There's a common thread through a lot of what the Bears did, more of it with undrafted rookie free agents and now signing Damian Byrd, is they're bringing in a lot of guys with return experience because you got to replace Cordero Patterson. And I would think since he's been first team All-Pro at it 2 years, you don't want to take Tariq Cohn off punts, but you want to have some options. So the return ability with a lot of these guys is intriguing. Now, Herbert is a kickoff returner. I don't think he has a lot of punt return experience, and he has caught his fair number of passes. He could be a third down back as well.
Yeah, Khalil Herbert is mostly a kick return experience in college. And he rushed for 1,000 yards last year with Virginia Tech. And this is a guy who basically bet on himself after 3.5 years at Kansas, at that awful Kansas program. He said he basically stepped out mid-season his senior year at Kansas to save that year of eligibility and transfer to Virginia Tech. And it worked out for him with a 1,000-yard season. And then you look at Daz Newsome, and he's a guy who has a little bit more punt return experience. So you're right, Hub, in that, the Bears know that they're going to have to find some way to get some answers in these return spots. And I don't think it hurts to just collect as many guys who have experience doing these things as possible and see what works. Throw it all out there and see which of these guys can get something done in that area.
Kyle, Daz Newsome, yes, solid punt return experience at North Carolina, but I don't think that was the main interest in him. This is a kid who had a 1,000-yard receiving season in 2019 as the number 2 receiver. Now, that North Carolina offense, it wasn't an air raid offense, but it was let's wing the ball all over the football field. So there's a lot of guys piling up a lot of yards. And then you look at those 2 incredible running backs. You got Javonte Williams and Michael Carter coming too, as well as Imani Brown, who went in the 3rd round. But I think Newsome, what the Bears are doing is they are just stacking up slot receivers at this point. That's why Byrd was added. That's where Newsome is. Anthony Miller is still a Bear. I'm not as convinced as others that he won't go to training camp and get a chance to compete there. So I think what they're saying is that as long as we have Allen Robinson here and we're excited about Darnell Mooney, we think we're fine at 1 and 2. And now we've got lots of options at number 3.
I think I was pretty vocal going into the draft about drafting a wide receiver. Didn't happen in the first few rounds because things fell the Bears' way in much more important positions. But I like what the strategy is here for the Bears. You look at Newsome. I don't know if you mentioned Marquise Goodwin. It's like the Bears are doing what I always think good franchises should do. You get a bunch of plus upside athletes and see what sticks.
Yeah, I actually forgot Marquise Goodwin. I mentioned the other 3. He's a guy who's had some success in the league. Byrd caught 47 passes with the Patriots last year. I'm not overly excited about any of these signings, but I think the competition is good. And Byrd and Goodwin are 2 more guys who give you return ability, punt and kickoff, and they've done it in the NFL. Sean, we go to Thomas Graham Jr., interesting young man, somebody I didn't have written up because he kind of dropped off the radar. He was a 3-year starter at Oregon, highly productive. A lot of scouts I talked to have said that if he'd come out after his junior year in 2019, he probably would have been a late 3rd, high 4th round pick, but he opts out last year. He's off the radar. He did go to the Senior Bowl. Apparently he looked like a guy who had been away from football for a year. You do worry a little bit about no top end speed, but this is a kid who's shown tremendous cover ability, in 3 years at a big time program. And now we're talking about stacking bodies at the slot nickel position, which is what they're doing here.
Yeah, he was pretty productive for Oregon in his 3 years there. And I think he even said something to the effect of how he goes to the Senior Bowl and puts on his helmet for the first time in a year. And he's feeling a little weird because he hasn't worked out with that helmet on. And I think maybe you could make the argument either way for some of these guys who opted out. And he's one who was hoping, I think, to be more in the 3rd round range and saw his stock drop a little bit. And maybe it would have helped to, like you said, either go out last year or play this past fall. But either way, he's adding some more depth at that position. And he was a fun guy to talk to. He basically said he loves talking to the media. So, hey, that's awesome for us.
Yeah, normally I believe it's almost never a good thing for these kids to come out early. But in the case of Graham Jr., if he had known, obviously none of us could have guessed, but if he had known what was coming with the pandemic, I'm sure he would have, gone into the 19 draft. He did the smart thing, trying to come back for his senior year, and unfortunately got punished for it by the pandemic. But obviously a lot of people have been punished in a lot of different and some very horrible ways by the pandemic. Now, Kyle, got
a question for you here that I don't want to leave Alan hanging for too long.
Sure. Do the Bears have enough cap space to sign this draft pool quickly, or might we see some holdouts? Alan, we're going to get to that last draft pick in just a minute. The answer is yes after June 1st, but none of these kids signed before June 1st anyway. By getting the extra $3 million, the Bears were about $3 million over the cap. Technically you can't be, but I don't want to waste a lot of time going over all the rules now. You get away with it. The Bears were about $3.4 million over the cap going into the draft. With the $9 million cap savings on Charles Leno, if they do it before June 1st with just $6 million, they still don't have enough. But with $9 million, they've cleared approximately $5.5 to $6 million in cap space. A normal rookie draft pool will run you about $4.5 to $5.5 million. But that includes some of the higher paid 3rd and 4th round draft choices. So I'm guessing what the Bears will need now. Fields will get a little more as a quarterback, but because he went at 11, I'm guessing a lot of you know. If you don't, all of this is slotted now. That was a result of the 2011 CBA and is carried over into the CBA. So there is some room for negotiation, but it's really more in terms than money. And so we can make a pretty good guess that the Bears rookie draft pool is going to be about $5 million, and they currently will have, with the Leno cut, about $5.5 million in cap space. Now, the Damian Byrd signing impacts it, but the way this works, I don't want to get bogged down in a lot of caponomics here, but until opening day, the Bears are expected to be at or under the cap based on the salaries of the 51 highest paid players on their roster. So if you sign a street vet like Damian Byrd, who I'm sure got very near the veteran minimum, which is going to be about $1.1 million for him, all that does is knock the 51st guy on your roster out and put him in that spot. I don't know who the 51st guy was, but he was probably making $700,000 or $800,000. So even though you've spent $1.25 million, $1.5 million, you've only added $300,000 or $400,000. So that doesn't have a huge impact on it. If the Bears have a serious move left in their arsenal, if they're talking about a starting left tackle, if they're talking about another edge rusher, something like that, who's going to cost $2, $3, $4 million, they're going to have to clear some more cap space, and they're going to have to clear more cap space anyway, because nobody goes into the season with no cap room. I mean, you have to allow, if a player goes on IR, now they do count against your cap, and you got to replace them. So they're going to have to create some room. My guess is that efforts to do a long-term deal with Allen Robinson are going to continue daily until they can't anymore, which I believe is July 15th. They could extend the deals of Akeem Hicks, which might make sense at this point. That could easily create another, $5-6 million in cap space. Unfortunately,
who have they reworked so far?
Well, they've reworked Khalil Mack and Eddie Jackson and Robert Quinn a few times. So you don't really want to do that again, because they've pushed a lot of pain down the road with them. But Cody Whitehair got a new deal at the beginning of the 19 season. Live TV again. Sorry, I forgot to turn the ringer off, guys. At any rate, they don't have a lot of options. I was looking at this. I know Akeem Hicks is a good option to get his deal reworked. And I'm trying to think if there's anybody, it has to be somebody with some money to get some significant savings. They're not cutting Jimmy Graham. So, maybe you rework him and give him another year. And
they would have cut Jimmy Graham before the draft, I think, if that was going to be a scenario that they considered.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that his deal has a lot of these people don't want to go away. I don't think that his deal has a lot of June 1st benefits to it. So he's
right.
Not going anywhere. But if you look at certainly Akeem Hicks, there's a possibility there. They're going to want to extend Roquan Smith and James Daniels, but those don't necessarily create a lot more cap space. So their best option is to get a deal done with Robinson. They will, make minor adjustments again with Jackson and Quinn and Mack. It doesn't cost anymore. It just turns more of what they're owed into guaranteed money, and that becomes dead cap money. But they'll do it if they have to. So they're at least in a position now, guys, where they can create the room they need to make another couple moves. They're going to want to go into the season with at least $3 to $5 million in cap space. And then, there could be a couple more surprising cuts coming. If I don't understand how Javon Wims stays on this team. I mean, you can certainly create at least $300,000 there. He's at just under $1 million. The rookie minimum is $650,000. If Anthony Miller goes, you create another $500,000 there by replacing him with a rookie. Is there another veteran that we're talking about? I think about half of that Jermaine Ifedi money is available to him. So even though they just signed him, I think they could cut him and save about $2.5 or $3 million if they think Elijah Wilkinson is good enough to back up these other guys. And Alex Bars definitely can play tackle if he has to. So, they've got some flexibility. Are they in a good spot? No. I think the other thing that everybody needs to realize is that it is likely that the cap goes up minimally next year or stays the same or even goes down again. That's going to be the pain that's going to be felt from the 2020 season. So they have to be careful in what they do here, that they don't create an even bigger problem next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how the cap is going to react after this season.
Well, guys, what it is, everybody keeps ignoring this, but at the end of the day, in the summer of 2020, the NFLPA and the owners got together and negotiated what I'm calling terms of engagement as to how they were going to work under the virus, under the pandemic. And one of the things they agreed to is the owners said they would put a floor of, I think at the time they said they would put a floor of a 10% cap cut. No, it was a 20% cap cut in 2021. And then save the rest for out years so that it wouldn't become unmanageable. So the teams didn't have to cut half their roster. They eventually ended up only cutting the cap 10%. Once the financials are done and once that the owners have demonstrated to the NFLPA what their actual losses in total football revenue were for 2020, they do owe the players do owe them more money because the players get 47.1% of the 20 revenue. Now that'll go up to 48.5% this year with the 17th game. But at the end of the day, there's hundreds of millions that the players have been paid that is over what they're entitled to in the CBA. And anybody who thinks the owners are going to let them keep that is kidding themselves. The owners are going to get back every penny they can at some point. The issue is going to be how quickly they do it. So there are currently negotiations going on right now for this season. That's why there's so much uncertainty about how many teams are going to have mini camps, how many, or they're going to have them, how many teams are going to show up. We'll get into all that before we sign off today. But the salary cap beyond this year continues to be an open question, and that's why it's important that the Bears be careful in whatever moves they do make here, Sean, to try and be in good shape, but also to field a winning team this year.
Yeah, and one other guy who we should mention in this conversation, who fans are probably curious about, is quarterback Nick Foles. Why keep him around? And if you just look at the specifics of his contract when they reworked that thing last year, when they got him, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense financially to cut him. He's owed about $6.5 million this year, and if you cut him right now, you're not going to make any of that back. And you could save a little bit by cutting him after June 1st, but it's so minimal. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for the Bears to do that. I think they'd save, according to Spot Track, they'd save about $1.5 million if they cut him after June 1st.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Sean, if they cut him before June 1st, they lose money. They take a cap hit because of the dead money. And part of the problem we have, Spot Track and Over the Cap are really good, but they never agree, and it creates some confusion. Eventually, we can get the actual numbers from the NFL Players Association, but that stuff doesn't get posted until we get into the season. So I'm not even sure that they gain anything by cutting Nick Foles. And at $6.6 million, which is his cap hit for this year, that's relatively inexpensive for today's the good backup quarterbacks. And you can still make the argument that Foles is the best backup in the league. What I don't understand is that Dalton's deal is a one-year deal. Almost none of it is guaranteed, and yet the two websites are still promoting that they would lose $2.5 million against the cap if they cut him. And so this is some of the vagaries of it that we just have to continue to work through.
This is probably a good way to segue, since we just mentioned the fact that we don't know about minicamp and what this summer is going to look like. We're talking about quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks and all the plan. So Alan had one more question for us, so I'll throw it up on the screen now. And this is really the talk that it's going to continue to be. It has been really since the initial reaction of Justin Fields being drafted died down. And it's, when is he the starter? And everything we're talking about here is going to play into that.
Well, and it's interesting. You can all see how Alan has posed his question. Is Fields more likely to sit a year or be starting after 4 games? The hotter button issue around town right now is, should he be starting on opening day? I know one of us on this podcast, I believe, thinks he should, or I won't say thinks he should, but wishes he would. But I'll let one of you say that because it isn't me. But relative to that, guys, all we know is, and by the way, when we get done here, stay at shawlocal.com or go to shawlocal.com, because Sean and I both have pieces on exactly this subject up right now. All we know at the moment is that it is vastly preferred around the NFL in almost every situation with a first round or highly drafted rookie quarterback to let them sit and watch for a while before they played. Tom Brady waited a year, Drew Brees waited a year, Aaron Rodgers waited 3 years, somewhat famously. You can find other examples. Ben Roethlisberger, Russell Wilson took teams to the playoffs in their rookie years, but they are dramatic exceptions to the rule. It almost never works out immediately. You look at the careers of guys like Peyton Manning and Troy Aikman. They were awful their rookie years in terms of throwing picks and making mistakes, and their teams were awful. One, I think, was 3-13. The other was 5-11. But they did go on to have Hall of Fame careers, so it's not like they were ruined by it. But then, Sean, I can give you a list as long as my arm of the first-round quarterbacks who many believe suffered more than anything by being put on the field too early. And so this is kind of the line the Bears have to walk. And the only real evidence that we have right now is that Matt Nagy's experience with this was, in fact, with Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, and it was because the Chiefs, in fact, were trying to win now, which is somewhat urgent for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, some believe, if they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, that's in his own words, in Matt Nagy's words, that's the blueprint. He said he doesn't know if they're going to follow the blueprint exactly. And you can't really say, but this storyline certainly isn't going to go anywhere. This is going to be around all summer, and this is what people are going to be talking about. I delved into it a little bit in my story on shawlocal.com. Go check it out if you're interested. Just looking back at what actually happened that 2017 season with Mahomes, when Nagy was the offensive coordinator. And really the key, as you mentioned, was the team was in good shape. They were in the playoff hunt, and Alex Smith played the best season of his career. He was playing really well. And so if you look at it in the context of Justin Fields, a lot of this is going to come down to how Andy Dalton is doing, come the season. If the Bears are terrible and Andy Dalton, just isn't getting it done, maybe that gives them more reason to put Justin Fields in the game. I certainly don't expect them to want to do it early, but I know Kyle has his own thoughts on when Justin Fields should see the field.
So you guys are overselling this here. I am
Hey,
not.
you sent the text, buddy.
I was kind of poking you because I knew your feelings. So, I mean, first off, yeah, Alex Smith 2017 season. I mean, if Andy Dalton plays anywhere near that, we should probably go buy lottery tickets. I think we're all in agreement that Andy Dalton at this stage of his career is just not a very good quarterback. I have a feeling that Justin Fields is, as now I'm the one getting 17 phone calls here as my phone starts going nuts. I think if we have a normal offseason or closer to normal offseason, if we have mini camps, if Justin Fields is at Hallis Hall practicing this summer, if he's there for preseason games, I think he's going to push Andy Dalton sooner rather than later. And if that's the case, I think you're going to see him pretty quickly. Now, the thing is, we've already seen it from Bears fans. We're relying on Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace not just to pull the trigger because he's a first round draft pick, but to honestly evaluate him and understand when he's ready to go. And you can see the hesitancy from Bears fans already, which is silly in my book. But I guess that's the question at this point. Do we think what is this summer going to look like? What do you guys think?
Well, Kyle, I mean, here's what's funny about it to me is I know you think how I feel about this. I know it's been all over my buddies at 670 The Score that, I'm dead set against it. And it's really not true. I don't really care whether he starts opening day or not. What I am adamant about is not putting him on the field too soon. And those are two very different things. We're talking about a kid who I don't even know if he's in town right now. I know he has not met most of his teammates. I know that he has certainly not had any chance to learn the playbook, learn the terminology, hasn't had a practice, hasn't thrown a pass. and everybody's going to make him the opening day starter when you went out and signed Andy Dalton for no other reason than his 142 starts and the 5 different Bengals teams that he took to the playoffs. And the fact is that is what is expected of the Bears this year. All the people who are screaming for Justin Fields to start on opening day are going to be furious if this team goes 7-9. I keep forgetting the extra game. Go 7-10, whatever it may be. And so what I feel very strongly about is let's find out if he's even close to ready yet before we start arguing about whether he should be playing on opening day.
I agree.
We're not arguing, obviously.
You're making the point. I mean, there are people that, immediately are jumping in and he needs to start right away. Now, I do disagree with your argument that when you cite some of the old guys or the old guard sitting, I do feel like we're starting to see a trend in the NFL where teams are more willing to start these guys earlier. We saw it with Kyler Murray. Justin Herbert did get thrown in quickly and obviously played very well last year, but that was kind of a weird thing with Tyrod Taylor and a doctor not knowing how to insert a needle correctly, apparently. But this is, I guess, Hub, I'll ask your opinion on this. Let's assume there's a regular offseason here where they're in minicamp and everything. Based on what you saw of Justin Fields on his college tape, and what you know of the Bears quarterback situation when it comes to Andy Dalton and Nick Foles, we assume Andy Dalton is QB1 because of a tweet, but Nick Foles is still on the roster, right? He could be the guy in week 1. Based on all of this and based on what you saw of Justin Fields, do you expect him to be pushing those guys in late August, or do you think it's going to be pretty clear cut that they're going to have to start with a veteran?
Kyle, I think it's both. I think that he is good enough to push them, but I think it's very clear cut that they're most likely to start with a veteran for the reasons that I keep trying to shine the light on. I mean, when you talk about Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield or Trevor Lawrence or any of these number 1 overall picks, that's a different conversation. Number 1, they are the number 1 overall pick. But number 2, the reason the team had the number 1 overall pick is because they stink and they're not trying to compete for anything. And so fine, put the kids out there. Let's teach them how to play the game. But when you get a situation like the Bears are in, or like the Chiefs were in, where you're coming off a playoff season and now you've drafted your quarterback of the future, A, there is no reason to rush him out there. And B, it's not necessarily fair to the other 52 guys on the roster. And then C, and most importantly, how many jobs are at stake if you start losing football games because you got a kid out there making rookie mistakes? Now, in answer to your question, I think that from what I've seen of Justin Fields, he does have a chance to be the exception to the rule. He does not have his, by the way, I just for grins, I checked. Patrick Mahomes had 29 starts when he sat for a year. Justin Fields has 22 starts. And then, you look at college starts we're talking about. And then, you just look at some of the other factors. He did not play at Ohio State an offense that is all that similar to what they want to do here. He showed the skills and the traits for it. But he's got a lot to learn. And so I think what the Bears are trying to do is have the best of both worlds, and I admire him for it. The problem that I have, and what I think is exacerbating this conversation, is that Andy Dalton was my last choice for the veteran that they were going to bring in to be the starter. And that's what makes this so hard. If they were just saying it's Nick Foles, I'd say, okay, he's a Super Bowl MVP. He had a Pro Bowl season, a legitimate Pro Bowl season, which I don't think any of Dalton's were. And so to me, it's a different conversation. But Sean, that's why I keep trying to change the narrative a little bit. Forget opening day. When is the right time? As long as he gives us some sign that he's ready, I'm fine. Put him on the field. But don't put him on the field too soon, because it would take me all day to list the first-round quarterbacks that have been ruined by exactly that.
And that's why I think this is such a big year for Matt Nagy, because, no matter what his status is moving forward, whether you think he's on the hot seat or not, this is a guy who's made a career off the quarterback position and evaluating quarterbacks, coaching quarterbacks, and now coaching the offense as a whole too. And he's got to get this right because basically, essentially, his tenure with the Bears is on the line here. Whether he puts him in too soon or you got to find that fine line. And we're going to learn a lot about Matt Nagy as a quarterback evaluator, which is what he prides himself on in the next few months here.
Kyle, I think the key here that people need to understand is that the biggest difference, the biggest change for all these kids, beyond playing better competition and beyond learning, whatever they have to learn to do what their team wants to do, is adjusting to the increase in the speed of the game. And you get first round picks, high picks, or even late round picks at other positions who are such exceptional athletes and such exceptional football players that even though it catches them by surprise and they'll make a few mistakes, they can overcome it on sheer ability. The problem with quarterbacks is that they're responsible for all 11 players on the field, and they're trying to adjust to it. And the reason this would be fun if I had a year to do it. I would bet that almost every quarterback in NFL history threw either the most interceptions of his career or close to them because of adjusting to the speed of the game. They're going to get back there. They're going to drop back. They're going to see things on the football field that made them heroes in college that are going to be interceptions in the NFL because of the way these guys break on the ball. And that's why that's the main part that this experience is so important.
I actually go the opposite way of throwing an interception because I haven't seen anything. You saw this with Tua last year. I saw several beat writers talk about it. Was that going from college to the NFL, he was so used to his receivers at Alabama being open that he was actually hesitating and not forcing the ball downfield because what we consider wide open in the NFL to him felt like they were covered. And you don't know. I mean, until we see Justin Fields on a field, we don't know how he's going to react to the NFL style defenses.
It's a different slant on exactly the same point. I mean, we are agreeing here is that he can show you all kinds of great things in rookie minicamp and OTAs, and even in these exhibition games if they're played, which, by the way, we don't know yet. There is a new plan. Things feel like they're getting better more quickly with the whole virus situation, but we don't know where that's going to end up, or not end up, but we don't know where we're going to be in 2 months. But even if you see all these things you love so much, until you play the game, a regular season game at NFL speed, you just don't know. And I would hate to see the Bears just commit because of pressure or whatever else to Justin Fields be the opening day starter and losing 2 or 3 games early that screw up the season because he made mistakes, Sean, things he just wasn't properly prepared for. And there's really no way to prepare him for it until you put him out there.
Yeah, you're not going to know until you put him out there. And that's, that's the fine line. That's what we're going to have to see here. I fully expect Andy Dalton to be starting come week 1, barring any injuries. And, maybe they do say it's his season for a while. And, the thing is, these things are so fluid and injuries happen. And you look at the way some of these guys get on the field, like you were saying with Justin Herbert. I mean, you can't predict something like that with Tyrod Taylor. Maybe the Bears, maybe something happens where you are forced to go to Justin Fields midway through the season. You just got to prepare him as best you can here in rookie minicamp and training camp, and hope that you can get him in good enough shape to take the field if something like that were to happen. But that's also, why it might be worth keeping a guy like Nick Foles around, because it does help to have 2 veterans too.
Well, and guys, let's keep in mind, again, nobody's going to try and predict what's happening with the pandemic, but we did end up last year with expanded rosters and expanded practice squad rules. They're going to have 3 quarterbacks. I can't imagine they'd rather have Tyler Bray than one of these 3 guys. And so I do think they're all going to be here. And you talk about Justin Herbert and Tyrod Taylor, forget the flukiness and the ridiculousness of the doctor puncturing his lung. Injuries happen. And in the case of the Bears, if it's week 1, week 2, week 3, based on everything else we know about where the team is at, where the defense is at, is this the last run with the defense? How much time do you have left there with the veteran players? Even if Dalton's the starter and gets hurt, my guess is if you don't feel Fields is ready yet, you're going to go to Foles before you go to Fields. The Chargers did not have that luxury.
You mentioned injuries there too, Hub, and we should mention Andy Dalton did have a pretty severe concussion, I believe, last year down in Dallas. And, he's had a bit of an injury history here the last couple of years now. Nick Foles has a bit of an injury history as well. So there's a path to where Fields is on the field even clearer than maybe they would like.
Yeah, I mean, guys, I think we can all agree. It seems most likely to me that Justin Fields is going to start more games as a rookie than Patrick Mahomes did. He didn't play until week 17 because they were resting everybody for the playoffs. I expect at some point this season, regardless of whether things are going good or bad, we are likely to see the transition. I'm just having a hard time finding any rational argument again today that opening day makes sense. Now, let's go the other way. Let's say they get the full off season, and let's see we see 3 exhibition games. Who knows what's going to happen? I think one of the reasons that some fans and media are overreacting a little bit to this with saying Fields has to start is because of his special athletic ability and his ability to run with the football. But that's not what you want him doing. That's not teaching him the position the way you want him to play it. And so to me, that's not a reason, Sean, to put him out there.
No, it's not a reason. And, of course, fans are going to want to see this guy as soon as possible. This is from a fan perspective. I mean, that was the perfect scenario for your draft night. And Bears fans had to come away from that feeling good. And obviously they want to see him as soon as possible. But like you're saying, it might not be the best thing for him. And I know it's hard to trust Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace to do it the right way, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who are in charge. And I would be surprised to see him, barring an injury, like we were saying, I would be surprised to see him out there before they think he's ready.
All right, guys, we are already running pretty long, and I do apologize again. The late start it's more on my computer than me, but it's on me. I'll take it. I have not mentioned our sponsor, our friends at Heinz Lumber, with 11 locations around Chicagoland. And Kyle, I do want to get back. I'm going to segue to one more, I think, important topic that nobody is talking about, but by talking about the one draft pick we didn't mention yet, and that's my guy Kairis Tonga, who, again, I had as possibly a late 4th, 5th round pick, who they got in the 7th round. He is not going to take Eddie Goldman's position away from him, but I think he is perfect to be number 2. The Bears did not have a number 2 nose tackle when Goldman decided to opt out last year. Certainly Akeem Hicks could be, but then you're taking away some of his best advantages. Bilal Nichols, Mario Edwards Jr., these guys just too small to play that position. Now we're in the 7th round. I think in Tonga, you got a guy who's going to make the team, and he's going to play as a rookie, at least in a rotation. And I got to tell you guys, I went back and watched some tape on him. He's a legit 2-gapper, and I think he can do it at the next level. And I want to make a bold prediction here. Those of us in the media often have a pool when training camp begins as to who is going to be the first fight and who's going to start it. And I will predict right now that the first training camp fight is going to be Tevin Jenkins and Kairis Tonga. I don't know which one's going to start it.
It's just unfortunate we don't have any trips down to Bourbonnais anymore to settle those bet playing bags over at TJ's across the street down there at ONU, but you'll have to find a new way to settle those bets this year, Hub. No, Tonga looks good. The defensive line in general, we felt pretty good with Goldman coming back. We wanted them to add depth. They did it. Tonga is solid. I think overall, Sean, you feel pretty good about where the defense is at. You can get any more out of that pass rush. You really need Robert Quinn to step up, obviously. But this defense should be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, that's the big thing. You got to get some more out of your pass rush, but that's going to have to come from your veterans, and those guys are just going to have to do a little bit more here and there to get some pressure on the quarterback. I like the Tonga pick too. I think he's a solid dude. He batted down 12 passes from the defensive line in college. I mean, that shows a knack for finding the ball with your hands there, and yeah, he's a good pick.
I'm laughing over here, guys, because Robbie just popped in and he was on the pre-draft show with us, and it was Frank from Oak Park. Hi, Hub. And when I read it, I said hi, Hub, in Frank's voice, and got me laughing over here. Sorry.
No, I get it. Listen, I did some emergency hosting at the Score Monday night for a couple hours when the Cubs got rained out with the Dodgers, and My last call of the evening was Frank from Oak Park, and it kind of makes the show. It's one of the fun things about talk radio is you've got fans who get to develop their own persona and even their own following around town. Apparently Frank has one. But guys, the reason that I wanted to get back to Tonga and segue to the defense real quickly is that I think everybody's forgetting that the main blueprint for this season starts with returning the defense to 2018 form, and that's a huge task. And I don't know if they're going to get it done or not. I like a couple things they've done. I have questions about some of the other things they've done. I think getting Tayshaun Gibson back was huge, keeping all those veteran safeties in place. It's only a 1-year answer, but at that position, you can get away with 1-year answers. There is clearly the talent on this defense to play the way they did in 2000. I'm not predicting anything here. We got a lot of work to do, but the talent is there. It's what they have focused on. I do love the addition of Mike Pettin alongside Sean Desai. I'm not commenting on Desai one way or the other. He's a young coach, and we'll see whether he was the best choice or not. But if you look full circle now, the chance for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace to keep their job. And by the way, I don't agree with most that they're as much on the bubble as a lot of people think they are. You guys heard me telling everybody would listen all year last year they weren't getting fired. I don't know that they're in as much jeopardy as people think they are in now. But let's assume that everybody's in jeopardy in the NFL. The need for those two to win football games, the fact that that defense, the 18 defense, certainly gives you a chance to contend for everything if you can play at that level. But where this group is at now is it's hard to see for another year or two after this, based on age and everything that's gone on. And if you've accomplished that, now if that's working, Kyle, you can't have a rookie quarterback out there throwing interceptions and stressing the defense. And I think it's another reason that Matt Nagy is going to be reluctant to go with the rookie, at least until we get a little bit into the season and see where they're at.
I'm not sure Andy Dalton and Nick Foles aren't going to be out there tossing interceptions, which is really where we get back into this kind of circular conversation. But no, the defense is it's certainly capable of keeping this team in contention. Yeah, I mean, I what else can you say about it? I think this is a well-rounded defense, particularly given modern NFL day standards. I think this is a defense that should be back up into the top 10 and should push to be a top 5 unit.
Yeah, and Sean, I know we're just having fun here, but to Kyle's point, I'm not sure how circular that conversation is. Only in terms of, again, based on what we know, rookies are a lot more to have trouble with this than veterans, and especially two guys as experienced as Dalton and Foles. I do not see much good coming from the Andy Dalton experiment, and I always feel the need, guys. I don't know if you guys do. Our job is to analyze and to give the pros and cons. Nothing against Andy Dalton, nothing against Nick Foles. Wish them the best things in the world. In fact, I'm jealous and I wish I was them because they're multimillionaires and I never will be. And so when we talk about this, we're not criticizing the guys. We're talking about the football players.
Right.
And Kyle's absolutely right. I mean, if we were going into the season with Andy Dalton and Nick Foles and Tyler Bray, the last one to write a team off would probably be ready to write them off, and maybe that's where, Sean, we want to start to put a cap on this. That's why Chicago is so excited about Justin Fields being here.
Yeah, and this question just popped into my head. I want to get your guys' thoughts. If Andy Dalton is out there and he's playing and the Bears are, hovering around 500, maybe they're a game over and they're in that wild card hunt. And if Justin Fields is doing good things in practice, do you ride it out with Andy Dalton and keep him on the bench?
I would think absolutely. I mean, that's what the Chiefs did with Mahomes' rookie year. And if we're still debating if it was Andy Reid or Matt Nagy, but if somebody didn't have a brain fart and forget the run game and then the second half of their wild card game, who knows how far they would have gone, So, Kyle, I think that as long as they're winning with either Dalton or Foles, assuming that's what's happening, there's no reason to put Fields on the field at that point, because Justin Fields is going to be the Bears' starting quarterback either on the first Thursday or first Sunday after Labor Day 2022. We all know that, okay? Getting them there sooner than that, Kyle, I think it will be it'll give them some comfort if they don't have to do it because things aren't going well.
Yeah, I mean, If there was an Alex Smith on this roster, I would say it's probably 90% chance, 95% chance that Justin Fields is riding the bench for the first 5 to 6 weeks at least, because of who they have on the roster. And this is, maybe I'm just feeling good about the world right now. I expect us to have a somewhat regular summer and training camp. I'm guessing that's probably closer to like 70-30, that Justin Fields is able to push those guys. But Hub, yeah, we got I guess I'll plug quickly here. As we come up on an hour, you reviewed the draft for each NFC North team, which we haven't even gotten into that. That's probably a good tease for our podcast next week. We should dive into these other teams, maybe have a better picture of what's happening with Aaron Rodgers right now. But I'm going to throw up a question here to kind of get us out of here. And it wraps up nicely everything that we've talked about. It's actually from my golf buddy. Mike jumps in the chat here and asks us, are the Bears in 2021 improved versus 2020?
Well, let me throw in one more thing, which is partially an answer to that, but also just to go back one more time to what's happening the first 4, 5, 6 weeks. I think we're completely forgetting something else, guys. Based on the last 6 weeks of 2020 and the addition of Damian Williams and Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum, the Bears have a chance to have one of the better running games in the NFL. And that will also have a big impact on who the quarterback is. Because, if in fact they're willing to lean on it, and now you're not asking a Dalton or a Foles to win games for you, it could very well, leave them on the bench that much longer. So at the end of the day, Mike, are they better than they were last year? They're basically, well, I can't say they're the same team on defense. The loss of Kyle Fuller is going to hurt. Now I think they've got enough at cornerback to still be really good on defense. And if the pass rush comes back, now we're talking about you, Robert Quinn, as well as everybody else, then, maybe we don't notice the loss of Fuller all that much. I think the offense is better because of the addition of Williams and these young tackles and keeping Allen Robinson. So, Sean, my vote is yes. From where we're at now, does it look like they've improved themselves since the end of the season? Overall, yes. I think they have.
I would say overall, a slight edge to yes. I do think they're, that you mentioned the Kyle Fuller, that's going to hurt on defense. I'm still curious to see how that plays out at the other cornerback position opposite Jalen Johnson. With this overhaul at tackle, you like the idea of what Jenkins could be for you at left tackle. I still am curious to see what, if Jenkins is in fact the left tackle, what shakes out on the right side. That's going to be a big question here moving forward. And, if Justin Fields is what you think he is, I certainly think he got better at the quarterback position. It just comes down to when we're going to see him play.
Kyle, let me give you the last word on this, and then we'll wrap it up. I think the other point we got to add here, because this touches the cornerback thing, the defense, and the whole team. I was sorry to see Barkevious Mingo go because I thought that he had a good season for them and was a significant contributor. But the addition of Jeremiah Adeochu, definitely upgrades the pass rush over what they had with Mingo. You've got Travis Gibson, who was drafted for exactly that purpose and didn't disappoint last year. We just didn't see much. And then we come back to Robert Quinn. If the pass rush is improved, 40, 50% over last year, which isn't unreasonable in a single season with the talent they have, then yeah, I think definitely they're probably a better team than they were last year.
Yeah, I think the pass rush will be improved. I think the running game will be improved. Interested to see how this offensive line comes together. I think that's a big key. I also think that I expect Cole Kmet, who we haven't really talked about, to take a big step forward. What we're going to have to find out pretty quickly, though, is we saw a lot of inconsistency last year. If we know how bad that 6-game losing streak was, and we saw how well they could play. We need to see a little more consistency out of this team for them to actually take a step forward in the win column, though.
All right, guys, we don't usually go this long. Again, I apologize for the late start. We do want to once again thank our sponsors, particularly our friends at Heinz Lumber. You want to get there for all your lumber needs, your construction, your rebuilding plans. They've got 11 Chicagoland locations. We hope that you will join us again next week. And by the way, you can text any of us, I should say email any of us, with our first initial, our last name, at shawmedia.com. And the reason I point that out, Let us know what you think. Do you like this format? You want us to stay with this every week? We're happy to do it. It works for us. And we'd love to have it turn into a big Bears community. So feel free to get to us. Again, you can email us the first initial, the last name, at shawmedia.com, and let us know what you think. Any one of us. Kyle's the boss, so you can start with him. Hopefully we'll have a lot of fun doing this as we get closer to the season. I can't promise every week like clockwork as we get into the off season. Sometimes we struggle a little bit for some content, but certainly with rookie mini camp next week and then the OTAs coming and the veteran mini camp after that, we'll either be talking all about that or we'll be talking about the guys who don't show up. We wait as the NFLPA and the league negotiate that. For now, we're going to say good afternoon, good day for today. Make sure you spend all your time at shawlocal.com, and thanks so much for being with us.